So I'm excited about this college career readiness, expanding that even more, because that does include engaging more of our community stakeholders. It includes being intentional with our education and understanding that there are diverse groups of individuals who have a lot to contribute, to these solutions in education.
Welcome to the Sapiens Podcast, the podcast that explores the inspiring stories and contributions from influential members of our community. My name is Sam, and today we are excited to introduce Dr. Tricia Braxton, a dedicated public servant and experienced educator who has made a significant impact on education, community welfare, and public policy in Nevada. With a doctorate in public policy, Dr. Braxton has been a staunch advocate for enhancing educational outcomes and improving community services. Her extensive experience in campaign and advocacy work reflects her deep commitment to finding practical policy solutions and fostering community engagement. Through her leadership and visionary approach, Dr. Braxton has become a key influencer in the fields of education and public policy. Welcome, Dr. Tricia Braxton.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So I want to start off by asking you if you could share with us a little about your journey into public service and what motivated you to focus on education and public policy.
Sure. I'll dive right in and talk about my parents. Both of my parents were in law enforcement, and they were advocates for community engagement. And my father, by the time he retired, he had 2 master's degrees, both in education. And then he moved out west and here to Nevada and became a teacher with the Clark County School District.
Amazing.
And then worked his way on up, having this as a second career to be an administrator. And he had a mindset that engaging with students and families was more than just talking about curriculum, right, or a textbook. You had to understand where that child was coming from before they sat in that classroom. You had to have an understanding that when they left that classroom, that they were going somewhere to do something. Hopefully, you were giving them the tools they needed to succeed and eventually lead a productive life. And so that was the first part. My mother also, when she came out here, she was a substitute teacher with Clark County School District. And so having that experience in law enforcement for them and then in education, that became my experience. I was a New York City police officer for 8 years. And it was wonderful. Oh, of course, so a wonderful career. With that, I moved out west and pursued education or pursued teaching while I was raising my kids. I became that substitute teacher with the Clark County School District. And I had a chance to bounce around to different schools, elementary school, middle school, high schools, and seeing schools in different zip codes. One thing that stuck out to me, coming out here, I noticed that there were schools with living namesakes. That blew my mind, coming from New York.
Yeah.
And I quickly had an understanding of what that meant resource-wise. And then I dived into different types of schools, charter schools, private schools, and what that meant. Comparing the experience here in Nevada to what I thought I knew in New York.
It seems like your parents were really pivotal in terms of not guiding your experience, but really examples for you that you wanted to also follow in their footsteps and also, be as impactful as they were as educators and as people in law enforcement as well. And so it sounds like they were really pivotal in your journey. And so I want to ask, how do you think your journey developed from theirs in terms of, did you do things differently or what did you change?
Okay, so that's a great question. When we think of relay, right? Mm-hmm. Relay teams. I ran track.
Yeah.
Did you run track?
No, I didn't. Okay. I was not coordinated, unfortunately. I got kicked off of all my sports teams.
It's All right. So my parents played a significant part in shaping my perspective about community engagement, community advocacy. All that glitters isn't gold, right? And sometimes people who may have holes in their shoes might be the folks you need to listen to. Absolutely. Because of that lived experience about what's going on in community. And so they instilled in me values that included hard work, empathy, compassion, determination. And that's what I bring to anything I do. But it's not about me, right? I'm part of this larger community, and we have different perspectives within our community. So how does that affect how we view safety, education, inequalities, housing inequalities, for example? How does that change our perspective or enhance our perspective when we're talking about apprenticeships and jobs? And are we ready for the jobs of tomorrow? So that's a very general overview of my experience. Both of my parents playing a key role in making sure that I was grounded.
Yeah.
Right. There are lots of distractions in society. And when it comes down to it, we're all trying to do the best we can.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So your parents kind of passed on this love for community engagement.
Passed on the torch.
Do you see yourself passing that on to your kiddos?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. But what I know is that they're individuals.
Yes, absolutely.
And they have different interests. And they will strive to be great in what they're interested in. My job as a parent, I believe, is to make sure that they have the tools they need to succeed. And I believe most parents would want to have that opportunity to provide their children with resources, to protect their children in so many ways. But eventually, you're just providing these tools for success. Your kids are going to leave the nest, and they will fly away.
Oh, I'm not ready.
And there's comfort in knowing that they can make their own decisions and that they can be critical thinkers. That's important.
Well, you are setting a great example for your kiddos. And I think that it's amazing that you're also using your experience and your position to really push forward these important issues. I want to ask you, throughout your career, you've been a strong advocate for educational reform. What are some of the key policies you believe are critical for transforming education in Nevada?
Sure. Looking at apprenticeship programs, for example, I think that's a dynamic approach to have people or children, have our kids have this hands-on experience. When I was a kid, we had something called Junior Achievement. And Junior Achievement was a program, I believe it still exists in some places, but where businesses could invite students into their space and learn some of the projects and principles and logistics of what it takes to do a task.
Mm-hmm.
And so this program was geared toward high school students. And I don't hear much about that. But that's a hands-on experience, right, that created. So, we do have apprenticeship programs. Our unions have apprenticeship programs for students. And really ties into a need of this practical application. So how many times will a student have an idea of what they want to be in middle school? Then they get to high school. Different idea.
Yeah.
So middle school, maybe they want to be that ballerina.
Yeah.
Okay. Or that Olympian. Then high school, okay, well, they want to be a football star. Or maybe they're thinking about, having a job.
Yeah.
Maybe. And
yeah.
they might go through training or continue their education in higher education. And then they might change their major or learn about an industry and learn that they don't want to participate in that industry. So how can we bring that level of understanding into our grades, our grade levels, right? Primary education space, secondary education space, so that it's less conceptual and more practical.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that so often, and I think I've reiterated this in the past with previous guests, but like we're so focused on like getting kids through school that we forget that like at the end of the day, they're going to have to pick a career or something to do. And we don't prepare them for that until they get to the end. And we're like, all right, be free.
Right.
You know,
education to what end?
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not saying that students need to focus on a job right away, right? That's not really it. But as I mentioned before, giving students tools they need to make their decisions means having them try out one career or investigate one career and understand why they might have to learn calculus, you know, or why, you know, learning history is necessary, you know, or why being able to communicate, being an effective communicator is important,
right?
You know, and so there's a bit of soft skill development that should be focused on. That would lead to any job a person chooses or bounces from one place to the next.
Yeah.
You know?
I think something that you said also is like, you know, giving them the opportunity to be like, you know what, actually, I don't like that. I don't. And not waiting till they get to college to figure it out and then have this crisis because they're changing majors and like that's frowned upon and like all of these things when we could have just been fostering their interest to begin with.
Sure. Yeah. Having them explore a little more, you know,
just a little more.
And then when in college, right, having tours, touring facilities or touring businesses, offices.
Yeah.
That would be amazing.
I love that perspective. And, you know, treating our children, not just our children, but like our children as, you know, a city and a state and a country, like treating our children as if they, you know, have a stake in their education and they don't just have to learn in four walls. They can learn outside and through experiences. I think it's so valuable. And I align so closely with that. And so it's refreshing to hear that perspective from you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool.
Did you want to add anything else to that?
No, it'll tie into whatever else you have.
Perfect. Can you discuss a particular success story or a challenging experience you've encountered in your advocacy work?
Sure. So the work I do, I didn't get into that. I'll touch on that a little bit, but as I mentioned, I was a substitute teacher at Clark County School District. I was also a first and third grade teacher in a local private school. I explored public, private charter schools for my children. I investigated those spaces, and my current work involves supporting community-based programs, the development of community-based programs to support pre-K through 12 education. And so when I look at these opportunities to present to community, right? And what does that mean? It means, okay, are we looking at mainstream classrooms? Are we looking at students who are neurodivergent? Are we considering our students who are minoritized or marginalized or at risk for expulsion? Where do our students fit in? And so there's no one-size-fits-all approach that will work for every group. That mindset, that mindfulness is necessary. And so with community-based education, there are so many wonderful agencies, wonderful projects, wonderful resources available. But not everyone in community knows about these programs and projects. So identifying that as a problem, I am happy that I'm in a position to now bridge that gap.
Yes.
Right? Learn about partnerships. And what does a partnership mean? What does a collaboration mean?
Right.
Does it mean providing a facility? Does it mean having access to different students? Does it mean funding? So qualifying that and then establishing those relationships or fostering those relationships, I think has been a real success.
That is amazing and so important, and something that I think all of our podcast listeners are going to hear over and over, because every episode I seem to talk about bridging the gaps and how critical it is.
Yes, bridging the gaps.
You have so many groups that all are doing great things, but separately. And it's okay, if we could all just talk to one another, at least just a little.
Right. Because what we see is that, it's a proximity issue. So what I mean by that is, let's say you have an amazing community resource in a particular neighborhood, and that's great, and it's doing well for its neighborhood, kids in the neighborhood. Could that be replicated? How can that expand?
Right.
We also know that there are differences in the types of programs that might be available in urban areas versus our rural areas. What works in an urban environment may not work in a rural environment, and vice versa. So how can we tailor these programs and these projects?
Right. It's how do we duplicate it? But also we can't, because really every population and every student deserves a different approach.
Sure.
Deserves to be met where they're at.
Yes.
And how do we do that when we have the most diverse population, especially here in Vegas, And
it's a growing community.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, parents, families are bringing a mindset of where they were into this space. Me being this parent, right? Moving from the East Coast to the West Coast, I had my perception of what was available. And I didn't find exactly what I thought I knew in New York here, but that's okay. There were opportunities here for my kids. Hold on, I was about to talk about my mommy group. I don't want to talk about the wonderful women that I still keep in touch with today, 21 years later, right? And we all share information about what's out here. So when we look at family values, I think we all want to do best for our kids. We want to do best for our community. And there are so many different perspectives. No one group has the answer and should dictate what values are for anyone else necessarily, right? We have different cultures coming into Vegas. We have just different mindsets, different experiences. But how beautiful is that when we can have so many different projects for different people with one common mission to do better for their kids.
I think so often we look at everyone's differences. Oh, well, you think it should happen this way. I think it should happen this way. But if we boil down half the issues we have, they all come down to we just want the best for everyone.
Yes. And so this becomes a discussion where I often talk about distractions in education. What I mean by that is perceptions of what's best. Okay, so 1 + 1 = 2. Which doesn't matter if kid reads from a red book or a blue book.
Yeah.
We have to make sure the kid knows how to read.
Yeah.
Can we get to that?
Yeah.
Stay focused on that. When we look at serious issues facing some communities, such as the rise in maybe gang violence or food insecurity or housing insecurity, okay, those are real issues also. And when we look at trying to attract educators, we want to attract the best. We want quality educators, and we want to maintain quality educators. Absolutely. Are educators able to live in the place that they teach? Those are concerns.
Yeah. So
yes, we call them distractions. Everybody has a different perspective. That's fine. But when it comes down to it, are we really focused on student success? Are we focused on teacher support? Are we focused on accountability? What's the right criteria that we're using to measure success in Nevada? Are we focused on safety? Well, right? And what does that safety aspect mean? There's the mental health discussion, but there's also the discussion of, if a crisis happens at a school, do we have quick access for law enforcement? Do we have quick lockdown for safety? These are real issues facing today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with any of the issues that we face, boiling it down to get to that common ground where we can all be like, you know what, we all can agree with this basic premise, I think is really important, and something that it seems like you highlight up as well, the value of, getting to common ground so progress can be made.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're currently campaigning for Nevada State Board of Education. What are the main objectives you aim to achieve if elected, and how do they align with the educational needs of Nevada?
I love that question. I'm going to reel it back a little bit.
Okay.
I don't know how many of your listeners know what the State Board of Education does.
Yes, please. Yes. Let's take a step back.
Sure. So we have an educational structure, an organizational structure for education in Nevada that includes the Department of Education at the top. There is the State Board of Education, which is the accountability arm for the Department of Education. We have then, if we're looking at a tier, we have our pre-K through 12 education that consists of having school boards. In Clark County, we have the Clark County School Board, but there are 17 counties in Nevada, and each of those counties have school boards. In addition to I don't want to misspeak, but there is a charter school board, there is a correctional school board, and then one other, sorry for the brain fog, but totaling 20 different school boards in the state of Nevada.
Wow.
We also have our Board of Regents. Our Board of Regents focuses on our schools of higher education, UNR, UNLV, CSN, Nevada State University, Desert Research Institute. So, with that, that's the organizational structure, if you will. The State Board of Education, being that accountability arm, takes information from our pre-K through 12 and also higher education to inform legislature on what the priorities could be and what we could focus on with policy. And part of my campaign has been to let people know we have a State Board of Education.
We're here.
We're here. There are 11 members who are part of the State Board of Education. 4 members are elected and 7 members are appointed. Of the 4 members who are elected, the geographical area that they are running to represent includes the same geographical area as a congressional district. So Nevada has 4 congressional districts and also 4 members on the state board vying to represent individuals in those congressional districts.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm learning a lot about structure.
Structure is very important.
Appreciate it. I mean, I think so much of that is, not paid attention to, but so valuable in terms of thinking about how the hierarchy is, who is really in charge of the concerns that we have about education. So I appreciate the breakdown of structure.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Sometimes individuals will come to me and they'll ask questions that I know should be directed toward the school board or Board of Regents. And then there are questions that I can answer with my position as a candidate, Clearly, when I'm elected, I'm just thinking positive here, right?
Oh, I'm thinking positively with you.
Thank you. There's work to do, work to be done. And it's important that each of these aspects of the Department of Education, of organizational structure of education, work together. Silos in any agency or any area isn't helpful. But when there can be this passing of the baton, if you will, right? I'm alluding back to that track experience.
Tying it in.
Yeah. It's that teamwork. It's that setting the tone. It's that having the common mission to move forward. So in Nevada, we have criteria that we work toward that, keeps us at this bottom part of the education rating. We get very low scores for education, very low scores. And so right now, I'll just, I know we have listeners who might have a perception of what that means and why that is. Hopefully some of the listeners are educators.
Yes.
I can tell you, our educators are doing the best they can do, right? Many of them are, if you will. And our students, some of our students are doing quite well also. But some of our instructors are struggling as some of our students are struggling.
Mm-hmm.
In Nevada, we don't have mandatory pre-K or kindergarten, right? So we get dinged heavily for that. If you use a criteria on states that have mandatory pre-K and kindergarten getting that higher score, well, it makes sense. We are at the bottom of that particular category. When we look at supports for our students that might be going from school to school, let's face it, some families are chasing rents. They call it chasing rents, right?
Yes.
Making sure that they can afford a place to live. There is this notion of tracking student success, but are we tracking the student and the growth of that student? Are we looking at just standardized test scores?
Right.
Or are we looking at the whole portfolio of the child?
Right.
The growth, the delta in that child's growth. How do we measure that? Right. What is that?
Good question.
Exactly. For our educators, are we listening, not just listening to what they have to say, but are we implementing best practices? Right? That's important.
Yeah.
I hope I answered your question.
No. I appreciate it. And I agree. I think that in terms of measurement, how are we measuring student success? And then how are we really showing up for teachers? We have these expectations, but, are we doing our job as a community to back them up, to actually, help them, help educators, but also help our students. We can't just expect instructors, teachers, students to succeed without that support. So,
right.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And so that answers for me the main objectives really that you want to achieve when you're elected is being able to implement some sort of support for instructors and also students. So that really answers to me the question of how you are going to show up as an elected official and what your main objectives are in terms of education. You want to be the support, you want to provide the support both for students and teachers and instructors to be able to actually make these changes, not just hold this expectation of them, but actually doing the things that help them get to that point, because expectations are great, but if you're not doing anything to get there, then, they're just a standard that you can never meet or, kind of hinder your progress.
Sure. And when you look at needing to check boxes, do we want our educators spending time just checking off boxes, completing reports? Do we want them to fully embrace education? I mean, that's a noble profession. And my sister, for example, she's an educator, right? I think my parents really influenced us.
Maybe a little.
But my sister, I'm very proud of her. She's been an educator for 27 years.
Wow.
In special education. And that's not easy, right? So are we giving our educators tools they need for their jobs to do a great job? Are we supporting them? And what does that look like? And is there a bit of consistency in that space? Professional development goes a long way, right? And so encouraging teachers to get that professional development, take those professional development courses to stay up with technology and using technology in the classroom. What does that mean, for them? And then what does that mean for our students also? What does it mean for our parents who, if they have time, right, helping reinforce what's learned in the classroom? And if not, can technology at least help keep them up to speed with what's going on in the classroom so that they can have these conversations with their children, with their kids, about their days?
Yeah. Something I like also is like providing teachers with trainings and whatnot. It's like adding tools to their toolbox. Right. And making sure that all teachers have access to the same tools so that we can have some consistency in education. And so if we have consistency in our educators, then that goes to our students. And while every student's different, if our teachers have that toolbox, then they're able to approach those students with the needs that they're at, or meet the students where they're at.
Right. And we're speaking very general here.
Absolutely. Yes.
Clearly there are teachers with different responsibilities based on the students' needs.
Correct. Yeah.
This isn't a cookie cutter approach. We mentioned that before. And there's also this notion that culturally speaking, right, there are things that we might want to consider, especially as our community grows. And so just as we want to have this expanded view of a curriculum that might be available for our different learners in our different school settings, we want to make sure that resources are available for our educators, depending on what their specific responsibilities are, what their specific needs are for their students.
Absolutely.
Again, touching on opportunities available or topics that teachers might want to focus on. And that could be anything from mental health for them, supports, in that way, or it could be days for professional development, managing the classroom, looking at options for different learners, right? What works in one classroom setting, one school setting, is only limited by the available resources and support. And it's not just administrative support, it's really community support.
Right.
So I have that experience as a first grade teacher, as a third grade teacher. I had time to meet with my parents. I wanted to meet with my parents. But when you have classrooms that are so large, 35, 40 students in a classroom, you may want to meet with your parents. Do you have time to meet with parents? After classes, you're completing reports and so forth. So what does that look like overall? By the end of the school year, are your students on track?
Right. And are you okay too as a teacher, as an educator? It's the coin is two sides there. So absolutely, I agree with that. And that sounds like something that you're really working towards finding a solution for. And
sure. And listening to our educators who are really in the field.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And what could work. I mean, it's so critical. To make sure that our teachers have the tools they need for success. There are legislators who are educators, and I'm so happy that they've taken this approach to affect legislation. From an educator's perspective.
I know, it's so beautiful. We've had some guests on the podcast previously that have talked about that intersection of how they are educators, they do have that perspective, and they bring it into the political space where it's really needed to have that, feet on the ground experience with that. So absolutely, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I want to ask you another question. So what unique challenges does Nevada face in education, and how do you plan to address those with your campaign goals?
Sure, thanks. We touched on the criteria for success and how that plays out for Nevada. We know that some of the challenges might include attracting industries, right, or 8 businesses with different industries, and making sure that our students are prepared for those industries. For example, Workforce Connections has identified, I believe, 9 key sectors. Of course, hospitality, gaming is at the top. But in some of our rural areas, there is farming and understanding agriculture, what that means, right? And so, looking at elevating or amplifying our apprenticeship programs is really important. And I'm going to throw in, this idea of teachers college academy, which is discussed right now. I mean, this is part of the conversation.
Yeah.
How could we, guide our homegrown talent
Yeah.
into education,
Yeah.
educators, right?
Yeah.
Having lived experience being from here, being from communities here to address the specific needs of students from communities.
Something that I'm from the East Coast, and, I always ask myself, why do people say like Vegas is not the same, or like that they're, because we're newer, or not newer, but, Vegas is relatively new, I guess, compared to like some East Coast places. And so how do we create that same sense of community? And I think so much of it boils down to that is like having generations on generations continue their lives here and giving them something to continue, giving them a place to continue. And I think the community I've seen as I was raised here, it's changed drastically. And I have seen where the generations I grew up with are now having their own kids and just building on that and giving them something to build too. And I think part of that is getting them involved in the community. And so that really resonates with me.
Absolutely. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to technologies, right? As technology improves or changes, there's this idea of AI.
Mm-hmm.
AI in the classroom. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Right? Are we going to stay ahead of the curve? For our students. I mean, my daughters know more about technology than I do in some regard, right? Especially when it comes to apps and AI. So, are we going to use technologies such as AI? Are we going to use technologies to reach our parents? Are we going to take a closer look on what safety measures need to be in place?
Yeah.
That's important.
Yeah.
So, I've mentioned apprenticeships.
Yes.
Talked about, getting teachers into that space.
I love that.
Hands-on experience.
Yes.
Right. Opportunities for that. Guiding students to have an idea or a taste of a profession before they make their decision to either go through a certificate program or go through an apprenticeship program or go to college to pursue that higher education degree.
Mm-hmm.
That's a focus of mine, right?
Yeah.
And amplifying that is everything. But that will also require me to know more about what's going on in our communities. We have so many different resources.
Just to get them all together. Get them all working together. And, you have to kind of create a machine of resources,
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also this idea of safety, right?
Yeah.
So considering mental health challenges for our students, mental health challenges for educators, what's being done for that? When I'm in office.
Yes.
And this is an important year. This is an election year. And so we'll see who those players are, come January 1st. Actually, come November 5th.
Yes.
And then in place in November 1st. And hopefully, working together, not only within the organizational structure of education that I mentioned before, but also cross-agency.
Can I ask you, you had mentioned a desire to kind of public safety, but like the mental health aspect. Can you expand on what that looks like for you when you get into office?
Sure.
How does that look?
Sure. Well, the State Board of Education, and I want to speak from the context of the State Board, because I might have ideas about different things.
Yes.
From the State Board, what are those professional developments, right? What does that look like? When we look at this criteria for success, and we look at, I don't want to say burdening our educators to report. That is so important. We need the proper metrics. We need data, right, to know whether or not we're up to speed. But I'd like to know more about how our teachers are doing and how they're feeling. Are they feeling safe in their space? Are they feeling supported by administrators and by parents? Are they able to have those 10-minute parent-teacher conferences? What does that look like?
Yeah. I think that would be a really critical thing for us in terms of advancing education here in Nevada. So I really appreciate and I look forward to that. Hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. Peeling back the onion. It's a wicked issue, right?
Yeah.
Wicked, but I mean, it's very complex.
Yeah.
But, as I mentioned before, we have key individuals in our legislature who are doing great work. And that's great. We have our educators who are doing great work. And we have families who are doing their best to support our schools. I was that parent once upon a time ago, knowing that my kids' teachers were super busy, starting the day, sometimes sending a note. It's going to be a great day.
Oh, I love that.
It goes a long way.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I think, making sure that we do our best to support teachers, I think is something that I take not in just to my professional experience, but also, I'm going to be a mom to kiddos who are in school very soon.
Right.
And so that's something I take. And, I think something that our listeners could take too as parents, like how can you support your children's teachers, even if it's just something as like a nice word or, a note, it doesn't have to be a financial thing. You can just be a nice person to these teachers who are, spending the larger half of the time with your babies.
Right. So. Right. And, and attracting those quality educators. What I mean by quality educators, I'm talking about people who have spent time learning themselves, getting their degrees, if you will, getting their certifications. They are professionals. And, that goes a long way, right? Yes. And for the most part, and again, this is just what I've experienced as a mom. Most of my daughter's teachers wanted to know, what more they could do, right? And so there were always reinforcing activities, right, sent home.
Yeah.
To help, I'm not just talking about homework. Right?
Yeah.
But just ideas, on what to do to help with spelling or math problems, Teachers often have very diverse group of students, diverse meaning an understanding of or academic achievement in the classroom. Yeah. That's a diversity that we need to understand. All of our students don't start at the same level, and some require more reinforcement, and that's okay.
Yeah,
But it's amazing what our teachers have to deal with at the same time, dealing with their own concerns, right?
Right.
Making sure that they can afford to live in an area they teach.
Right. I mean, I used to, as a kid, think my teachers lived in the classroom, but to my surprise as an adult, they don't. They have lives.
They have lives. They have lives and they have their own kids. Right.
So supporting them outside of the classroom and making sure that, they're not overburdened and that they can take on the load that they're given.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So what is your perceived role of technology and innovation in shaping the future of education, and especially in the context of your policy proposals?
Sure. So I'm not in a position yet to present a policy, but policies that I am looking at with regard to technology is exploring more of what AI is, right? And if it's a tool that students are using for writing papers or whatever, right? How can we detect original composition over generated composition? And there are tools out there.
Yeah.
That can give a detection for plagiarism, for
Yeah.
example. But there needs to be a bit of fact checking. So we want our students to be critical thinkers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, once upon a time ago, we didn't have the internet. And then all of a sudden the internet became this tool that everyone was using, and it was very scary when it was introduced. But we learned how to use it, and the internet didn't take over. It's still staffed by people who input data. I think that is a challenge that we should take with open arms and put safety measures in place, because that's very important. Having access to everything isn't always the right answer when you consider the development, right? The human development. And so learning how to use certain tools, use a computer. There's also this idea of equity, right? So to use a computer, you need Wi-Fi.
Right.
And so not everyone has access to Wi-Fi.
Nope. That's correct.
What does that look like? Not everyone has access to computers. Libraries are great resources, but there aren't enough computers for a whole community in the library. There are adults who go to libraries to use a computer to write their resume. There's resume help, right, for example, at libraries. But what can we do to use technology responsibly? That's a focus.
Yeah. I like that you mentioned embracing AI and, kind of learning from our experience with the introduction of the internet and saying, okay, well, we noticed the safety concerns that came up with that. Like, let's be proactive rather than reactive. Sure. And you know what? AI has become part of our reality, and we can either embrace it with open arms, or we can, shun it and then not learn how to use it properly. And so I think that it's a really valuable opportunity for children and for adults and parents. Like the parents listening to this, I think I've heard so often the fear some parents have of what that means for their children's future. But it can be an opportunity.
It can be an opportunity, but that's why I focus on these safety measures, right, in place. I'm really happy that there are firewalls at schools, to prevent certain ads coming up for our students. So that's key.
Yeah.
But yet when we look at having those firewalls in place, someone had to take a deep dive into this technology to find out what some of the where some of the holes were. All right, that we needed to consider. Our approach needs to be more proactive. So looking at technology, the safeties around that, but also engaging our students. So, for example, there's a project that I'm a part of where there's something called hydroponics. Hydroponics is plants growing with water.
Yes.
That's all it means. Water working for you. And you add nutrients to the water, and that's great. But a microprocessor added to that hydroponic unit may allow one to see if there's water that's decreasing at a certain rate, or whether or not certain nutrients are needed, if the pH level changes, or if a certain plant is in that hydroponic unit, what's the optimal lighting? And so that microprocessor is a technology that's used for hydroponics. Having student-led projects, I think, would be great, because our students they are engrossed in this new world, right? I wouldn't say new world necessarily, but they're more likely to embrace technologies and use it faster than people in my age group. And so could we have a challenge for students that says, okay, if we're going to live in an environment that's a hostile environment, hostile meaning, I'm describing Vegas.
It only gets to 120.
It only gets to 120, right?
Only.
But in our growing communities, could we have hydroponics used to farm, right? To farm. And if so, what does that mean? So that also then goes to the discussion, or leads to the discussion of HVAC, right? Air conditioning and climate-controlled environments, and all of the technologies that go into maintaining a climate-controlled environment. And then you have to go a step further to look at energy and energy use. And is solar practical, or are we having to tap into some of our electricity? And if that is the situation, right? So I can see you go on and on and on with this, but I love when students are able to understand what some of the obstacles are, or what some of the challenges are in their environment, and then brainstorm on solutions. And so, again, teaching our children the soft skills for decision making, right? Or making those decisions and working together, or finding out, using their resources to find out more information. Okay, so here's an environment, Las Vegas. What other place around the world has a similar climate and similar obstacles? Well, we can go to the other side of the world and know that there's, technologies used, to make sure there's drip irrigation, and make sure there's, plants growing and farms that are growing quite well and meeting the needs of the community. Can we bring that here? So
how beautiful that we are teaching and seeing the very problem solvers that will, sustain us in the future. I think about, I tell my son, he was like, I want to live on Mars. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I'm like, you figure that out and we'll go.
And so I'm so happy you mentioned that, right? So a couple of years ago, we had students, they had to come up with a project for a competition. And that was their challenge. How could they sustain life on Mars? And they reached out to some of the subject matter experts to find out what that meant, living on Mars. There was a movie by Matt Damon called Martian. And, it was cut short a little bit, his experience there, but here it is, an area, an environment that's not, you're not going to live in this environment. So how could you sustain life, even just for a couple of months, I think giving students the chance to understand what challenges are, ideate on possibilities. We don't know what we don't know. And some ideas may sound absurd, but we may need that in order to grow and invent. And if we're able to invent, then we're able to apply this concept, this new invention. We might fail, but there's multiple iterations of trying to address a problem until we find a solution. And I think that concept can be applied to our educational system as well.
Nothing is impossible.
Nothing is impossible.
We just haven't learned it yet.
Exactly.
The power of yet. I love that. Yes.
Someone told me, I had a conversation with them a while ago. We were talking about the mind of a preschooler and the development of a preschooler. And the fact that a preschooler could look at blocks and they might see a city, but we just see blocks.
Yep.
That's amazing, right? And so what can we build? How can we go back to that time of invention, creating something that can be used? That's why we have the technologies we have today.
Oh, yeah. I have conversations with my 4-year-old, and I am always amazed because, like, you think of ideas that I could have never thought of because my brain has just been conditioned to be like, nope, that's not possible. And I look at him and I think I agree with you. Like, some of the younger kids probably hold the answers to our future and we don't even know it because they're bringing up solutions and we're like, that's not possible.
Yeah.
But it is. It is.
Very well can be.
Yeah.
Who would have thought that there was something about AI
You're right.
talking about now?
And here we are.
Here we are.
Yeah. No, anything is possible. So I can totally agree with that. And I think the role technology plays is a huge one and something that we're still understanding. But I like that, a lot of your goals and policies drive this idea of safety and technology.
Safety and technology, paramount.
Yes,
absolutely. It really is. We don't know what we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
We also should not fear what we don't know. But I like the idea of looking at these safeguards. So when I'm speaking general again, but for elementary students or middle school students, making a leap too quick without ensuring that a foundation is laid and solid could be detrimental.
Right.
So for example, when we learn to read, we first learn an alphabet.
Mm-hmm.
We first learn the alphabet sounds. And we use those alphabet sounds to form words.
Mm-hmm.
We use those words to form sentences, right? The incremental approach is necessary, but we should also consider the incremental approach to our grade levels as well, ensuring that there are foundations that are solidified as we move forward. And then the complexity of knowing that we have different learners and there are different approaches to teaching that may be more useful than others.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask you about your community engagement. So I know it's a crucial part of shaping effective educational policies. So how do you involve yourself with various stakeholders in the decision-making process to ensure the policies are comprehensive and inclusive?
Sure. So with resources, let's just say resources for school, let's define resources, reinforcements for education, let's say after school programs, right? So that's a particular resource, a type of resource, an after school program where during the day, there might be a lot of, conceptual learning the student has. And then there's an opportunity, if the student has time, to engage in an after-school program, to learn more about civic engagement or learn more about community involvement where they are interning or taking a leadership approach to whether it's a garden at their classroom or working or interning or doing a junior achievement or something, at another agency. I think that's really important.
Community engagement is crucial in shaping effective educational policies. How do you involve various stakeholders in the decision-making process to ensure that policies are comprehensive and inclusive?
Sure. So let's say you have students, a group of students who local law enforcement. And between the counselor, the principal, law enforcement, myself, individuals, in my space, we developed a mentorship program for students who would have otherwise been kicked out, right? So here were students who were going through something, and part of the criteria to be part of this program is that they had to exhibit leadership inequalities. Right?
Yeah.
That's a spin. Kids who are causing trouble, wreaking havoc in the classroom, but could they be leaders?
Yeah.
Yes. Could we redirect their attention to something else? Could we affect how they view themselves?
Yeah.
And people around them? Could we identify what they were fearful of, what they were grappling with that may have caused some of this behavior? Was that possible? Well, it required educators, it required counselors, it required law enforcement, it required outside agencies to come together to think about what could we do. And this was a matter of taking accountability as adults.
Yes.
Right? Here's an issue. It's going to be a bigger issue if we don't address it.
Right.
Could we affect some change with a group of students at the school? And the answer is yes. It's better, studies show it's better and more cost-effective to be proactive than to wait until a situation gets worse.
Yeah.
All right. So that's an example.
The proactive efforts that are put in, because every child deserves that opportunity. And if you just have people who collectively care about the outcome, you really can change the outcome. And so honestly, programs like that need to exist more, in my opinion. And I think that is so amazing and hopeful for me that, kids who maybe aren't in the ideal situation have an opportunity there for them. So I love that.
Yeah, and when you're not in that ideal situation, what happens?
Yeah.
This is why public school education is unique, because you're not excluding students. You really have to take in everybody, and what that means is understanding and knowing, really taking time to know what those community needs are. Knowing, a bit of the socioeconomic status of your surrounding areas and how that might affect how students behave in the classroom and their attitudes toward school, right? When you consider Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that the first level is making sure you have food and water and shelter.
Yep.
And then that second part is body safety, space safety, having a space that you can protect who you are. Those areas, those two levels have to be addressed in order to then implement, some sort of program or project. So if those things don't exist, how can we create that environment?
Yep, because kids can't learn if they don't feel safe and if their basic needs are not met. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think parents listening should absolutely think about and look at Maslow's hierarchy of need, because it can be a really useful tool for parents to think about, am I meeting all of these, or where is my child, maybe not feeling safe if they're struggling in school. I think knowing the knowledge base of how we build a secure environment for our child, I think is really helpful. So I think it's a useful tool for educators, parents.
Sure. Yeah. And then defining what safety looks like, right?
Yes.
So there are different foci on what safety means, right? And so, going back to what I learned from my dad, the focus isn't so much on textbook and curriculum as it is understanding how what's being taught can be applied to what people are experiencing.
Right. Absolutely.
And back and forth, right? That's necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. So, given your extensive experience in public policy and education, what advice would you give to aspiring public servants who wish to take a significant impact in their communities?
Lean into what keeps you up at night, and then find people who may think the way you do and who think differently than you do, to work toward a common mission, right? And so I use this term protect. Protect education. Protect education is a way to protect our children, to protect our educators, to protect community. Making sure that the basics, that the fundamentals are focused on. There are lots of distractions out there, right? We want to make sure, regardless of the book that Johnny reads from, that Johnny can read to begin with.
You're right. Yes, absolutely.
So let's focus on that.
Yeah.
And so lean into what keeps you up at night, and know that there might be alternative solutions. You're working toward incremental progress.
Mm-hmm.
There's no one solution or one size that fits all. Be willing to hear from someone who thinks differently than you, but also be mindful that your opinion counts, your expertise counts, your lived experience counts. And use that. We can live in a world of theory all we want, or think that we want. There's also the fantasy of a perfect world and this one size fits all, but that's a fantasy. The reality is that we have our different experiences that will inform how we go about addressing issues. Find what that issue really is and work toward a solution. Work toward a solution that really uplifts community as a whole instead of tearing it down. It's easy to tear something down. It's easy to complain. It's easy to point fingers at someone else or something else to say, that is the problem. If you want to advocate for something, look deep within yourself and find whether or not you are being congruent with your thought, whether you're being truthful with your approach. Be truthful to yourself, and then what you have to offer to community comes from that space of truth.
Wow. I think we just need to pause on that, because now I'm sitting here and I'm like, wow, am I being true to myself? That's a really thought-provoking thing for you to say. And I think anyone listening is going to be like, wow, am I being true to myself? And what do I believe at my core? And, I think people who have that, maybe split between what they believe versus what they're doing,
right,
might be a hard gap to fill. But I think recognizing, are we being true to ourselves? It's a profound thing.
Thank you. And then instead of tearing down, what are we building up?
Right? Yeah. Wow. That's really, really again, thought-provoking thing for me. I'm sitting here now thinking about that, and now I'm going to have a crisis of, am I true to who I am? But I appreciate that comment, because it really is interesting in terms of advocating for what you believe in.
Sure.
And why you do that. I want to ask you, so looking forward, what are some of the major initiatives or projects that you're excited about, and how do they aim to enhance community welfare and educational standards in Nevada?
So I'm excited about this college career readiness, expanding that even more, because that does include engaging more of our community stakeholders. It includes being intentional with our education and understanding that there are diverse groups of individuals who have a lot to contribute, to these solutions in education. There's no one size fits all. There's no one set of values or pointing fingers that's going to really help the issue. How can we, defenses down, work toward a solution, a bit of ideation, multiple iterations and on different solutions? I think that's a good start. And then continuing, holding ourselves accountable is key. It's also a part of what is needed in education settings. And so we have our public schools, we have our private schools, we have our different types of public schools that include our charter schools, we have our parochial schools, and that's great. When we look at criteria and we look at matrices, are we using the same criteria across the board? Are we using same or reporting, right, that can identify how our students are expanding in knowledge? What's their delta of growth? So I'm super excited about college and career readiness because that addresses education to what end. It also will help our students and our students strive toward something, and our teachers to know that, or educators to know that the work that they're doing is not in vain.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that having people who wholeheartedly believe in projects such as this and making sure that our children and our students are really getting the education they deserve and getting the support they need throughout their academic journey. And I love that you're working towards that. And I think it's really meaningful.
Thank you.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Well, I'd love for folks to visit my website. It's www.tricia, Braxton.com, where they can learn more about my platform. And also, I have a survey. Of course, I'm an educator. I have a survey on my website where I'm asking people to give me input on what they think these solutions could look like, right? What these best practices could look like. I invite those ideas because I don't have I have ideas, but they're just mine.
Right. And
if I'm going to be with community, work with community, my campaign is a community campaign.
Yeah.
Then it has to speak to what people are looking for.
Their lived experiences, their actual opinions on what's happening, because like you said, you have a different experience than someone else. And so making sure everyone's voice is heard. And I love that. And I'm going to go take that survey.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I definitely will be taking the survey myself, as I think it's critical that we have our voices heard in the community because, we can't expect change to happen if we're not actually voicing ourselves in an appropriate way.
Yes. And being solution driven.
Yes.
We know what the problems are. Yeah. Let's talk about those solutions. And if you have some ideas, be explicit with your approach. That would be helpful.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Braxton, for joining us today and sharing your knowledge in public policy, education, community welfare. I think your commitment to finding practical solutions and fostering community engagement is truly commendable. And again, if our listeners do want to learn more about you, they can visit your website and complete that survey. And then we'll also have information on thesapiens.com if you'd like to know more about this podcast or continue listening and following your political journey. I hope that her story has inspired you as much as it's inspired me. And I thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Cool. This is fun.